Welcome to the Explainer. Now, today we're looking at a topic that, you might instantly associate with dusty old poetry lessons, but I promise you it's anything but that. We're diving into Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. But we're going to look at them through a completely different, highly structural lens. Think of this as the executive classics continuum. We're going to break down how these ancient texts function not just as stories, but literally as the ultimate executive blueprints for civilization, teaching us strategy, governance, and survival. Okay, let's start with a wild thought. The blueprint for literally every modern blockbuster was engineered 2,800 years ago. I mean, think about the high-stakes thrillers, those sprawling digital series, and the highly adaptable heroes we binge-watch today. We kind of tend to picture classical antiquity as just a bunch of guys in togas debating in quiet marble halls. But the reality? The reality was a highly competitive, incredibly fast-moving, and innovative technological landscape. We're going to completely reframe how we look at the ancient world and see exactly where our modern narrative architecture comes from.
So let's dive right into this. To really understand Homer, we've got to take a massive leap back in time. Right around 1200 BC, we get the Bronze Age collapse. This was a period of severe societal ruin, just total cultural isolation that became known as the Greek Dark Ages. But fast forward to the 8th century BC, and we witness this explosive resurgence, the Greek Renaissance. This is when independent city-states, or the sovereign polis, think Athens and Sparta, really structurally emerge. And in 776 BC, we see the institutional staging of the very first Olympic Games. The citizens of this 8th century resurgence, they looked back at the monumental ruins of that collapsed Bronze Age and basically mythologized their ancestors as these structural giants and divinely bred heroes.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did those mythologies actually survive and scale up? Well, it all came down to a monumental technological innovation. Driven by this huge demographic expansion, Greek city-states were setting up commercial colonies all across the Mediterranean and Black Seas, specifically targeting southern Italy, which was consolidated as Magna Graecia. They basically turned the sea into a massive maritime highway for high-volume trade. And through strategic trade with the Phoenicians, the Greeks modified the existing alphabet. But step two? Step two is the real game changer. They integrated vowels for the absolute first time in human history. This ancient innovation is exactly what allowed for step three, the precise, standardized data capture of a rich, fluid oral history that had just been bouncing around for generations. Which brings us to a really fun puzzle, the famous Homeric question. Who actually was Homer? There's this deep, ongoing academic debate about whether Homer was actually a single historical blind poet, or if Homer was simply a functional pseudonym. It might have actually been a title assigned to a collective guild of traditional bards known as Eidos. Before the technology of writing could capture the text, these epics were structurally sung at state banquets, paced by the rhythmic metric of a stringed instrument, the lyre. So they were really a collective cultural product of this vibrant oral tradition. And this collective product gave us two totally complementary frameworks. Honestly, the Iliad and the Odyssey are essentially two sides of the same unified human matrix. The Iliad is entirely focused on the systemic tragedy of total warfare, collective rage, and massive institutional friction. But then, on the flip side, the Odyssey shifts gears completely. It details the mechanics of strategic survival, individual intelligence, and the ultimate triumph of the sovereign innovator. Let's break down the underlying mechanics of the Iliad first. Okay, so in the Iliad, success is measured by two primary market metrics, kleos and time. For the elite actors operating in this epic, physical life is viewed as an inherently finite asset. I mean, everybody dies, right? Therefore, the primary operational objective is trading that finite physical life for kleos, which means eternal legacy, and time, which is institutional honor on the battlefield. It's a high-stakes transaction where your actual physical life is the currency you use to buy a legacy. We see this transaction play out perfectly in the architecture of the siege. Interestingly enough, the epic deliberately avoids tracking the whole 10-year Trojan War. Instead, it focuses strictly on a localized, high-stakes operational window in the very final year. And the entire engine of the plot is an institutional crisis. King Agamemnon severely insults the coalition's primary military asset, Achilles. Because of this friction, Achilles just completely withdraws his assets from the field. And the market reaction? It is immediate and brutal. Deprived of Achilles, the Greek forces experience catastrophic losses, culminating in the death of Achilles' close advisor Patroclus. And that is exactly what forces a volatile, vengeful re-entry into the market to eliminate the Trojan threat. This absolutely encapsulates the core philosophy of Achilles. It's a highly calculated trade-off.
He makes a conscious, executive decision to choose a compressed, glorious life over an extended, anonymous existence. He maximizes his heroic capital, knowing exactly what it costs. He trades the length of his life for maximum historical impact. Now, what's really interesting about this next shift is that the Odyssey completely pivots away from that brute force framework. Here we're introduced to metis. Odysseus brings us a highly disruptive archetype of leadership. He totally rejects relying on raw, brute military force. Instead, he leverages metis, which translates to localized cunning, situational awareness, and pragmatic intelligence. The executive goal shifts dramatically here. It's no longer about dying young for vanity. It's about optimizing survival, securing long-term estate preservation, and protecting the family asset at all costs. And trust me, Odysseus absolutely needs that pragmatic intelligence because the hostile forces he encounters are severe. His 10-year maritime transit back to his sovereign estate in Ithaca is what you call a severely disrupted enterprise. He has to mitigate massive systemic threats, the raw strength of the Cyclops, the sorceress Circe, the psychological trap of the Sirens, and then, back home, dozens of predatory suitors who have infiltrated his estate trying to seize the throne. It is just one crisis after another. And this brilliantly illustrates how Odysseus, alongside his queen Penelope, optimizes survival and long-term estate preservation through pure cunning tactics. I mean, Odysseus engineers the ultimate asymmetric corporate trap, the Trojan horse. He neutralizes the Cyclops not by outmuscling the giant, but by strategically rebranding his own identity as nobody. Meanwhile, Penelope is managing a brilliant corporate defensive operation back in Ithaca, resisting those suitors to protect the family asset. It is an absolute masterclass in using intellect and strategy over sheer physical power. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these texts were far, far more than just entertainment. The Homeric epics functioned as the actual operational and civic ledger for the ancient Greek world. They are, quite literally, the structural birth certificate of Western civilization. It was through studying these specific lines that ancient elites learned everything: literacy, military strategy, political governance, and structural theology. It was basically their ultimate operating manual for life. The legacy of these ancient ledgers is just staggering, and it feeds directly into our modern world. Centuries later, Alexander the Great actually kept an executive copy of the Iliad right beneath his pillow during his global campaigns. And remember that blockbuster blueprint we talked about at the start? Virtually the entire narrative structure used to cross modern cinematic blockbusters, digital series, and high-stakes entertainment, it is a direct derivation of the architecture engineered in the Odyssey. Every single highly adaptable modern protagonist who navigates institutional crises through creative problem-solving is a structural descendant of Odysseus, no question about it. Which leads us to a final thought for you to consider today. Let me ask you, do you rely on the heroic capital of Achilles or the pragmatic metis of Odysseus to navigate your own institutional crises? When faced with friction, are you driving forward with brute force, willing to burn out brightly for legacy and honor? Or are you utilizing situational awareness and cunning to optimize your long-term survival? The blueprints for both were written 2,800 years ago, but the choice of which one to execute today is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you view the classics.